The last thing I expected was for my daughter-in-law to stand in my living room, the one I'd lived in for 30 years, and say, "You have 2 days to get out, Margaret. I'm not calling security, but I will if I have to." My son had been dead for 6 days. 6 days. And she was already erasing me. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. You might just get a shout out in my next video. And thank you for being here. This story isn't easy to tell, but I think you'll understand why I had to share it. It started 3 weeks before everything fell apart. Daniel called me on a Tuesday morning, like he always did. I was folding laundry in the kitchen when my phone buzzed on the counter. His voice sounded tired, but warm. "Morning, Mom. Just checking in." "You sound exhausted, sweetheart," I said, pressing the phone between my shoulder and ear. "Are you sleeping?" He laughed, that soft chuckle that reminded me so much of his father. "Not enough. Work's been crazy. But I'm good. Promise." We talked about nothing important. The weather. A recipe I wanted to try. His plans to visit that Sunday. Before he hung up, he said something I didn't think much of at the time. "Mom, I love you. You know that, right?" "Of course I do, baby." "Good. Don't forget it." 2 days later, he collapsed at his office. Massive heart attack. He was 45 years old. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. When they handed me his belongings in a plastic bag, his watch, his wallet, his wedding ring, I couldn't breathe. I kept thinking, this isn't real. This is a mistake. He just called me. We were supposed to have Sunday dinner. But the only mistake was thinking I'd have more time. The funeral was on a Thursday. Rain came down in sheets, turning the cemetery into a sea of black umbrellas and muddy shoes. I stood at the front, numb, watching the casket being lowered into the ground. Vanessa stood beside me in a designer black dress, her face hidden behind a veil. She cried loudly, choking sobs that echoed across the graves. People whispered how devastated she was, how strong she was being. But I noticed something they didn't. When she thought no one was looking, she checked her phone. Twice. And when the service ended, she didn't linger at the grave like I did. She walked straight to the parking lot, heels clicking against the wet pavement, and climbed into Daniel's BMW. She didn't wait for me. I stood there alone, rain soaking through my coat, staring at the fresh dirt covering my son. A woman I barely knew, one of Daniel's co-workers, came up and squeezed my hand. "He loved you so much, Mrs. Lawson," she whispered. "He talked about you all the time." I nodded, unable to speak. Because if he loved me so much, why did I feel so completely alone? After my husband died 10 years ago, I learned what loneliness really felt like. But this was different. Losing a spouse is devastating, but losing a child feels like the world has been rearranged in a language you don't understand. At the repast, I sat in a corner of the community hall while people ate casseroles and spoke in hushed tones. Vanessa held court at the center table, accepting condolences like a queen receiving tributes. "She's so brave," someone said. "Poor thing. So young to be a widow." I looked down at my untouched plate. No one asked how I was doing. No one sat beside me. It was like I'd become invisible the moment my son stopped breathing. Daniel used to fill that gap. He'd call. He'd visit. He'd pull me back into the world when grief tried to swallow me whole. Now he was gone, and the space he left felt impossible to cross. I watched Vanessa laugh, actually laugh, at something someone said. And that's when I knew. She wasn't mourning. She was performing. 2 days after the funeral, I was sitting in the living room folding Daniel's old baby blankets when Vanessa walked in. She didn't knock. She never knocked anymore. She stood in the doorway holding a coffee mug I didn't recognize and stared at me like I was a stranger. "Margaret, we need to talk." I looked up, still holding the soft yellow blanket Daniel used to drag everywhere as a toddler. "Of course, dear. Sit down." She didn't sit. "You can't stay here anymore." The words didn't make sense at first. I blinked, setting the blanket down carefully. "What do you mean?" Her voice was flat, cold. "This house. It's not yours anymore. It's mine. Daniel left everything to me, and I need you to leave." I felt my chest tighten. "Vanessa, this is my home. I've lived here for over 30 years. She shrugged. "Your name isn't on the deed. Daniel's is. And now that he's gone, it belongs to me. I'm just giving you a heads up before the will reading makes it official." I stared at her, searching for any trace of the woman my son married. The one who smiled at Sunday dinners. The one who called me Mom at their wedding. She wasn't there. "He wouldn't do that," I said quietly. "Daniel wouldn't leave me with nothing." Her smile was thin and sharp. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you guilt-tripped him into paying your bills all these years." She tossed an envelope onto the coffee table. Inside was a receipt for a moving company. "You have 2 days. After that, I'm changing the locks." I packed what I could fit into 3 suitcases and 4 boxes. Clothes. Photos. My late husband's watch. A ceramic vase Daniel made in 3rd grade that was lopsided and painted bright blue. Vanessa watched from the hallway, arms crossed, as I carried everything to my friend Linda's car. She didn't offer to help. She didn't say goodbye. When I turned back to look at the house one last time, the house where I raised my son, where I buried my husband's ashes in the garden, where every corner held a memory, Vanessa was already standing in the doorway. She didn't wave. She just closed the door. The sound of it locking echoed in my chest like a gunshot. Linda drove me to her house in silence. She didn't ask questions. She just set up the guest room, made me tea, and sat with me while I cried. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Daniel. About the life I'd built. About how easily it had all been taken away. I wasn't angry yet. I was just empty. The guest room at Linda's house smelled like lavender and old books. The bed was soft, but I couldn't get comfortable. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa's face. That cold, entitled smirk. I thought about calling a lawyer, but what would I say? I didn't have money for a legal battle. I didn't even know if I had a case. So I did the only thing I could. I prayed. Not the kind of prayer you say in church with your head bowed and your hands folded. This was desperate. Raw. I sat on the edge of that bed in the dark and whispered into the silence. Please, God. If there's any justice left in this world, let it find me. Let my son's memory mean something. Don't let her win. I didn't expect an answer. But 4 days later, I got a call from Mr. Caldwell, Daniel's lawyer. Mrs. Lawson, we need you to come in for the will reading. There are some things you need to hear. His voice was calm, professional. But there was something else underneath it. Something that sounded almost like hope. What Vanessa didn't know was that my son had seen her for exactly what she was. And he'd made sure I'd never be at her mercy again. But I didn't know that yet. I walked into that lawyer's office thinking I'd lost everything. I had no idea I was about to watch her world fall apart. If you want to know what happened when that lawyer opened the envelope, keep watching. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who believes in justice, even when it takes time to arrive. While I was sleeping in Linda's guest room, Vanessa was redecorating. Linda heard it from her neighbor, who heard it from someone at the salon. Vanessa had hired an interior designer. She'd bought new furniture. She was throwing a celebration of life party, which sounded more like an excuse to show off than honor my son's memory. But what really twisted the knife was what I saw 2 weeks after the funeral. I'd gone to the grocery store, the one near my old house, and there she was, standing in the checkout line wearing a cream-colored coat I'd never seen before and carrying shopping bags from stores I couldn't afford even when my husband was alive. She looked happy, not peaceful, not healing. Happy. She didn't see me at first. I watched her laugh with the cashier, swipe Daniel's credit card, his card, the one with his name still on it, and walk out like she owned the world. Maybe she thought she did. That night, Linda showed me something she'd found online. Vanessa had posted on social media a photo of her in front of a marble fireplace with the caption, "New beginnings. Choosing joy. He would want me to live fully." The comments were full of heart emojis and words like brave and inspiring. I closed the app. I couldn't look anymore. Because while she was choosing joy, I was choosing between which bills to pay first. One night, I couldn't sleep. Again. So I did what I'd been avoiding. I opened the box of things I'd taken from the house. Inside were photo albums. Daniel's baby shoes. A few of his old school reports. And at the bottom, tucked into a manila folder, were letters. Letters he'd written to me over the years. Some from college. Some from his first job. A few from after he got married. I pulled out one dated 3 years ago. The handwriting was unmistakably his, careful, slanted, always in blue ink. "Mom, I know you worry about me. But I promise, I'm okay. Work is good. Life is complicated. Vanessa and I are figuring things out. She's not like you. She doesn't see the world the way you do. Sometimes I wonder if she sees me at all, or just what I can give her." My hands trembled as I read the next line. "But don't worry. I'm taking care of things. I always do. And no matter what happens, you'll be okay. I'll make sure of it." I read it 3 times. Then I pulled out another letter. And another. In every single one, there were small hints. Little cracks in the perfect picture he tried to paint. He never said it outright, but I could feel it between the lines. He knew. He'd known what she was long before I did. And somehow, even in death, he was still trying to protect me. The letter arrived on a gray Monday morning. It was addressed to me in clean, professional type, Margaret Lawson, care of Linda Pritchard. The return address read Caldwell and Reese, attorneys at law. My stomach dropped. Linda stood beside me as I opened it, her hand on my shoulder. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Dear Mrs. Lawson, you are hereby requested to attend the formal reading of the last will and testament of Daniel Robert Lawson on Friday, November 10th, at 10 a.m. Your presence is required. Please arrive promptly. Sincerely, Arthur Caldwell, ESQ. Required. Not invited. Required." That's a good sign, isn't it? Linda asked gently. I didn't know. I wanted to believe it was. But after everything that had happened, hope felt dangerous. "Maybe," I whispered. But the truth was, I was terrified. Terrified that Vanessa was right. That Daniel had left me nothing. That I'd walk into that office and hear a stranger confirm that I no longer mattered. That I'd become a footnote in my own son's life. The law office was downtown, tucked between a bank and a coffee shop. The building was old but elegant, brass fixtures, marble floors, the kind of place that smelled like leather and important decisions. I arrived 15 minutes early. Linda offered to come with me, but I told her I needed to do this alone. The receptionist, a young woman with kind eyes, offered me tea. I accepted, even though my hands were shaking too much to hold the cup steady. And then she walked in. Vanessa. She looked like she'd stepped off a magazine cover. Hair perfectly styled. Makeup flawless. A black designer handbag slung over her shoulder and heels that clicked sharply against the marble. She saw me sitting there and smiled. Not a warm smile. A knowing one. She didn't sit near me. She chose a chair across the room, crossed her legs, and pulled out her phone. Every few seconds, she glanced up at me, that same smug expression flickering across her face. I kept my eyes down, hands folded in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. She wanted me to feel small. And I did. But something inside me, maybe it was Daniel's voice in those letters, maybe it was stubborn pride, refused to break. So I sat up straighter. I met her gaze. And I waited. At exactly 10 o'clock, a door opened and a man stepped out. Arthur Caldwell was in his early 60s, silver-haired and calm, with the kind of face that had seen 1,000 family disputes and never flinched. He gestured for us to follow him into a conference room. The room was simple. A long wooden table. Leather chairs. A window overlooking the street below. Vanessa sat down first, smoothing her skirt and setting her bag on the table like she owned the place. I sat across from her. Caldwell took his seat at the head of the table, a manila folder in front of him. He adjusted his glasses, opened the folder, and cleared his throat. "Thank you both for coming," he began. "This will be brief, but I ask that you allow me to finish reading before any questions or comments." Vanessa waved a hand. "Of course. Let's get this over with." I said nothing. Caldwell unfolded the document slowly, deliberately. His voice was steady, professional. "I, Daniel Robert Lawson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, one hand resting on the table, fingers drumming lightly. She looked bored. Confident. Like she'd already won. Caldwell continued. "To my beloved wife, Vanessa Lawson, I leave the contents of our joint checking account and my personal vehicle, a 2019 BMW 5 Series." Vanessa's smile widened. She glanced at me, eyebrows raised as if to say, "See?" But Caldwell wasn't finished. "To my mother, Margaret Lawson." My breath caught. "I leave all remaining assets, including but not limited to, the family home located at 428 Oakwood Drive, my investment portfolio, my company shares in Lawson Engineering, and all associated accounts, properties, and holdings." The room went silent. Vanessa's smile froze. Her fingers stopped drumming. She blinked once, twice, like she'd misheard. "What?" she whispered. Caldwell didn't repeat himself. He simply continued, his tone unchanging. "All assets are to be transferred to Margaret Lawson immediately upon probate. No contest clause is in effect." Vanessa sat forward, her voice rising. "That's impossible. He wouldn't. There has to be a mistake." Caldwell looked up calmly. "There is no mistake, Mrs. Lawson. Your late husband's signature was witnessed and notarized. Everything is legally binding." Her face flushed. "He was manipulated. She pointed at me, her voice trembling with fury, "she must have forced him. She's been guilt-tripping him for years." I still hadn't said a word. I just sat there, staring at my hands, trying to process what I'd just heard. The house. The investments. The company shares. Everything. Caldwell folded his hands. "You're welcome to contest the will, but I advise you to consult with your own attorney first. The document is airtight." Vanessa stood abruptly, knocking her chair back. "This isn't over. I'll fight this. I have rights." "You do," Caldwell said evenly. "But it won't change the outcome." She grabbed her bag, her hands shaking, and glared at me with so much venom I felt it across the table. "Hope you enjoy sleeping on the street," she hissed, "because after court fees, that house will be mine. You can't even afford to defend yourself." Her words hung in the air like smoke. But before I could respond, Caldwell cleared his throat. There's one final thing. Vanessa froze. Her hand was on the door. She turned slowly. What? She snapped. Caldwell flipped the page. And the entire room shifted. I didn't know it yet, but my son hadn't just protected me. He'd made sure that when the truth came out, it would be impossible to ignore. And Vanessa was about to learn exactly how much she'd underestimated him. Stay with me for Act 3, because what happened next changed everything. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Justice is coming. Vanessa's hand dropped from the door handle. She turned back to face Caldwell, her eyes narrowing. What do you mean, one final thing? Her voice was sharp, defensive. We're done here. I got the car and the checking account. She got the scraps. What else is there? Caldwell didn't flinch. He simply tapped the folder in front of him. Your late husband left additional instructions. A personal letter to be read aloud at this meeting. Vanessa laughed, a brittle, ugly sound. Of course he did. Let me guess, more guilt-tripping from beyond the grave. Mrs. Lawson, Caldwell said quietly, I'd ask that you sit down. I don't need to sit down, she snapped. Just read whatever it is so I can leave. I have an appointment with my attorney this afternoon. I watched her from across the table. She was unraveling, but she didn't know it yet. The cracks were showing, in her voice, her posture, the way her fingers kept gripping and releasing her purse strap. She thought she still had control. She was wrong. Caldwell glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Mrs. Lawson, Margaret, are you comfortable with me proceeding? I nodded. My throat was too tight to speak. He opened a separate envelope, unfolding a handwritten letter. Daniel's handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. And then Caldwell began to read. But before he could start, Vanessa cut him off. You know what? She turned to me, her voice dripping with venom. I don't care what that letter says. You think you've won something here, Margaret? You haven't. You can't afford a legal team. You can barely afford groceries. She leaned forward, hands planted on the table, her face twisted with contempt. Hope you enjoy sleeping on the street, because after I'm done contesting this joke of a will, you'll have nothing. Not the house. Not the investments. Nothing. You'll die alone in some state-run facility while I live in the home you think is yours. Her words should have hurt. They were designed to hurt. But all I felt was a strange, quiet calm. Because somewhere deep down, I knew. Daniel had seen this coming. I didn't respond. I didn't defend myself. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't see someone powerful. I saw someone scared. Caldwell cleared his throat. If you're finished, Mrs. Lawson, I'll continue. Vanessa straightened, smirking. Go ahead. This should be entertaining. Caldwell adjusted his glasses and looked down at the letter. The room felt smaller suddenly. Heavier. This letter, he began, was written by Daniel Lawson 3 months before his death. He requested it be read only in the presence of both his mother and his wife. Vanessa crossed her arms. How dramatic. Caldwell ignored her and started reading. To my wife, if you are hearing this, I want you to know I loved you once. Vanessa's smirk faltered. Just slightly. But love built on greed cannot survive. Her jaw tightened. You took my mother's kindness for weakness. You mocked her sacrifices. You made her feel small in her own home, the home she raised me in. I saw it. I heard it. And I promised myself she would never depend on you. Vanessa's face went pale. Her arms dropped to her sides. Caldwell continued, his voice steady and unyielding. You always said she was a burden. You were wrong. She's the one person I trust to use what I've built wisely. Because unlike you, she knows that wealth means nothing if it doesn't serve others." The silence in that room was deafening. Caldwell turned the page. "As for you, Mom, stop worrying about bills. Stop apologizing for needing help. I set up an account in your name. The details are enclosed. You once told me that teaching never made you rich, but it made you useful. Now it's time you learned that kindness can make you wealthy too." Tears blurred my vision. I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying not to break. He'd known. He'd seen everything. And even in death, he was still taking care of me. Caldwell paused, glancing at Vanessa. She was standing frozen, her face a mix of shock and rage. "There's one more line," Caldwell said softly. He requested I read it last. Vanessa's voice was barely a whisper. "What does it say?" Caldwell looked directly at her. "My mother's current net worth now exceeds $8 million. The room went completely still. I stopped breathing. Vanessa blinked. Once. Twice. "What?" Her voice cracked. "What did you just say?" Caldwell repeated it, calm and clear. $8 million. Vanessa's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was seeing a stranger. That's not possible," she stammered. "He didn't have that kind of money. The company wasn't worth," he never said. "He sold his shares in Lawson Engineering 6 months ago," Caldwell explained. "Privately. Quietly. The sale was finalized 3 weeks before his death. All proceeds were transferred into a trust in Margaret's name." Vanessa shook her head violently. No, he would have told me. We were married. He couldn't just." "He could," Caldwell said. "And he did. He also changed the deed to the house 4 months ago. Margaret Lawson has been the legal owner since July." Her legs wobbled. She grabbed the back of the chair for support. "You're lying," she whispered. "This is a setup. She must have." "There is no setup, Mrs. Lawson." Caldwell's tone was firm but not unkind. "Your husband made these decisions of his own free will. He met with me multiple times. He knew exactly what he was doing." Vanessa's breathing turned shallow. Her face was sheet white. I don't understand. Why would he?" "Because he saw who you really were," I said quietly. It was the first time I'd spoken since entering the room. Vanessa's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide and wild. "And he loved me enough to make sure you could never hurt me again." For a moment, Vanessa just stood there, staring at me like I'd slapped her. Then her eyes rolled back. Her knees gave out. And she collapsed. The sound of her body hitting the floor was dull and final. Her designer bag spilled open, lipstick and credit cards scattering across the carpet. Caldwell sighed, standing slowly. "That happens more often than you'd think." He walked around the table, crouched down, and checked her pulse. "She's fine. Just fainted." I sat frozen, hands still folded in my lap, staring at the woman who'd tried to erase me now crumpled on the floor of a law office. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I just felt tired. Caldwell called his assistant to bring water. Within a minute, Vanessa stirred, groaning softly. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. What happened?" "You fainted," Caldwell said simply. She sat up slowly, looking around the room like she'd forgotten where she was. Then her eyes landed on me. And reality came crashing back. Caldwell helped Vanessa into a chair and handed her a glass of water. She didn't drink it. She just held it, staring at nothing. I don't understand, she whispered again, her voice hollow. He never said anything. We talked about money all the time. He never mentioned selling the company. Because he didn't want you to know, Caldwell said gently. He made that very clear in our meetings. He wanted to ensure his mother's security without interference. Vanessa looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. So all those times I told him to invest differently, to buy property, to plan for our future. He was planning to leave me with nothing? He left you the car and the checking account, Caldwell corrected. That's not nothing. Her laugh was bitter. Compared to $8 million? It's insulting. It's what he believed you earned, I said quietly. She turned to me, her expression shifting from shock to something darker. You poisoned him against me. You made him think I was. I didn't have to, I interrupted. You did that yourself. Her face crumpled. Not with sadness. With rage. You'll regret this, she hissed. You don't deserve any of it. You're just a bitter old woman who couldn't let go of her son. Caldwell stood. Mrs. Lawson, I think it's time for you to leave. Vanessa grabbed her purse, shoving everything back inside with shaking hands. She stood unsteady and glared at me one last time. This isn't over. Yes, I said softly. It is. She stormed out, heels clicking unevenly against the floor. The door slammed behind her. And then, finally, it was quiet. Caldwell sat back down, folding his hands on the table. Your son was a remarkable man, Mrs. Lawson. He came to me months ago and said, I need to make sure my mother never has to ask anyone for anything ever again. He was very thorough, very deliberate. I nodded, tears finally spilling over. He always was. He also left you this. Caldwell slid a small envelope across the table. It's a private note. Just for you. My hands trembled as I took it. Take your time, he said gently. There's no rush. I didn't open the letter right away. I couldn't. Because I knew that once I read it, it would be real. Daniel would truly be gone. But he'd also be everywhere, in every decision he made, every dollar he saved, every word he wrote to protect me. Vanessa walked out of that office, convinced she'd been robbed. But the truth? She'd lost nothing she ever actually had. Stay with me because this story doesn't end with money. It ends with something far more valuable. If this story moved you, please like, share and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, have you ever seen greed destroy someone from the inside out? Vanessa sat in that chair for a long time, staring at the glass of water in her hands like it held answers. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I didn't say a single word. Because watching her realize what she'd lost wasn't satisfying in the way I thought it would be. It was just sad. She'd married my son. She'd stood beside him at the altar and promised forever. And somewhere along the way, she'd chosen money over love, possessions over people. Now she was left with a car and a checking account. And the knowledge that the man she married had seen through her completely. Finally, she stood. Her legs were still shaky. Her face was blotchy and streaked with mascara. She didn't look like the polished, confident woman who'd walked in an hour ago. She looked broken. I need to go, she whispered. Caldwell nodded. Of course. My assistant will show you out. She walked toward the door, then stopped. Without turning around, she said, Did he really think I was that terrible? I could have said yes. I could have twisted the knife. But I didn't. I think he hoped you'd prove him wrong, I said softly. But you never did. She nodded once, then left. The door closed behind her with a soft click. And I finally let myself breathe. I gathered my things and thanked Caldwell. He handed me a folder with all the documents I'd need. deeds, account information, instructions for accessing the trust. If you have any questions, he said, call me anytime. Your son made sure everything was ironclad, but I'm here if you need guidance. I nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard voices. Vanessa was standing near the elevator, phone pressed to her ear, her voice rising. I don't care what it costs. I want to contest it. There has to be a way, undue influence, coercion, something. She was talking to a lawyer. Already. I walked past her slowly, headed for the stairs. But her voice stopped me. You. She lowered the phone, glaring at me. Don't think this is over. I'll fight this. I'll tie you up in court for years. You'll spend every penny defending what you stole. I turned to face her. For a moment I just looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized something. She wasn't angry because she loved Daniel. She was angry because she'd lost control. You can try, I said quietly. But greed isn't grounds to contest a will. And my son knew that. Her face flushed. You turned him against me. No, I said. You did that all by yourself. I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard her shouting, but I didn't look back. Because for the first time in weeks, I didn't need to. 3 days later, I stood on the front porch of 428 Oakwood Drive. My house. The key felt heavy in my hand. I'd been given a new one. Vanessa had changed the locks after kicking me out. But Caldwell had them changed again, and now the only key that worked was mine. I slid it into the lock and turned. The door opened with a soft creak. I stepped inside. The air smelled different. Vanessa's perfume still lingered faintly, mixing with the scent of furniture polish and something floral I didn't recognize. The walls were the same. The floors were the same. But everything felt hollow. I walked through the living room slowly, running my fingers along the back of the couch. Daniel used to sit there on Sunday mornings, reading the paper while I made breakfast. In the kitchen, I found a mug in the sink, Vanessa's, half filled with cold coffee. I poured it out and washed it carefully, setting it in the dish rack. I climbed the stairs to Daniel's old bedroom. She'd turned it into a closet. Racks of clothes lined the walls, shoes stacked in neat rows. Designer labels everywhere. I stood in the doorway, remembering the boy who used to sleep here. The boy who built blanket forts and dreamed of being an astronaut. The boy who grew up to be a man who protected his mother even after death. I didn't cry. I just whispered, "Thank you, baby." And I felt, somehow, that he heard me. The next morning, a moving truck arrived. Vanessa had sent movers to collect her things. I'd agreed to let her take what was hers, the clothes, the furniture she'd bought, the decorations she'd chosen. I didn't want any of it. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched as they carried out boxes and bags. Designer coats. Expensive lamps. A velvet armchair I'd never liked. One of the movers, a young man with kind eyes, paused on his way to the truck. "Ma'am, there's a photo on the mantel. Should we take that too?" I walked inside and looked. It was a wedding photo, Daniel and Vanessa, smiling under a flower arch. My son looked so happy. "Leave it," I said softly. "She can decide if she wants it." When they came back for the last load, the photo was still there. She never asked for it. By noon, the house was empty of everything that had been hers. I walked through each room, opening windows, letting in fresh air. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I just felt free. That evening, I cooked dinner in my kitchen for the first time in weeks. Nothing fancy, just soup and bread. But it tasted like home. And for the first time since Daniel died, I didn't feel alone. A week later, Caldwell called. "There's one more thing Daniel left for you," he said. I'd like to show it to you in person, if you're available. We met at his office the next morning. He handed me a single key on a wooden keychain, engraved with coordinates. "What is this?" I asked. He smiled. "Your son bought a property 6 months ago. A cabin on Lake Monroe, about 2 hours north. He wanted you to have a place to go when the world felt too heavy." I stared at the key, my throat tightening. "He said to tell you it's not much, just a small place with a view. But it's yours. Paid in full." That Saturday, Linda drove me up to see it. The cabin sat at the edge of the water, surrounded by pine trees and wildflowers. It was small, like Daniel said, just 2 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and a porch overlooking the lake. But it was perfect. Inside, on the kitchen table, was an envelope with my name on it. I opened it with shaking hands. "Mom, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Don't waste tears on anger. Let the money serve others. Start the scholarship you always dreamed of. You taught me that legacy isn't what we keep, it's what we give. I love you. Always. Daniel." I sat down at that table and cried. Not from grief. Not from pain. From gratitude. Because even in death, my son was still teaching me how to live. 6 months later, I stood in the auditorium of Monroe Community College. The scholarship fund had been established. The Daniel Robert Lawson Memorial Scholarship for Education Majors. Every year, it would help 5 students become teachers. Students who couldn't afford tuition, who dreamed of giving back, who understood that teaching wasn't about money. It was about making a difference. The first recipient was a young woman named Sophia. She cried when they called her name. Her mother cried too. Afterward, Sophia came up to me, her hands folded nervously. "Mrs. Lawson, thank you. I don't know what I would have done without this." I took her hands in mine. My son believed that kindness was the only investment that never loses value. "You're proof he was right." She hugged me. And I hugged her back. Because that's what Daniel would have wanted. Not monuments. Not buildings with his name on them. Just quiet acts of kindness that ripple outward, long after we're gone. That evening, I drove back to the cabin. I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and watched the sun set over the water. The sky turned gold, then pink, then deep purple. I thought about Vanessa. I wondered if she ever found peace. If she ever realized that the things she chased, money, status, control, were never going to fill the emptiness inside her. I hoped someday she would. But that wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I thought about Daniel. About the boy who used to catch fireflies in jars and the man who built an empire just to make sure his mother would never be afraid again. And I whispered into the quiet, "I'm okay, baby. You made sure of it." The breeze picked up, rustling the trees. And I swear, just for a moment, I felt him there beside me. People ask me sometimes if I regret not fighting back harder. If I wish I'd said more to Vanessa, done more to hurt her the way she hurt me. But here's what I've learned. True wealth isn't what you're given. It's what you give back. My son gave me security. But more than that, he gave me purpose. And now, every scholarship awarded, every student who walks across that stage, every life changed because of his foresight, that's his legacy. Not the money. Not the house. Not the number in a bank account. The love. The kindness. The belief that we're here to lift each other up, not tear each other down. Vanessa spent her life chasing wealth. I spent mine creating it. And in the end, that made all the difference. The sun dipped below the horizon. The lake turned silver. The world grew quiet. And I smiled. Because justice doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it comes with silence. And peace. If this story touched your heart, please like, share and subscribe. And leave a comment telling me, What would you do with a second chance at legacy? Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember, kindness is the only currency that never runs out.